All right, been a few days since I did a favorite players list, and yes, I have 15 favorite players from Montreal. You know, the weird thing for me is when I started watching hockey, the teams I immediately drew towards were Vancouver, Calgary, and Montreal. Now, Minnesota, of course, due to that run in 1981, had a close place in my heart. But we didn't get to see Minnesota much on Hockey Night in Canada, so I had to rely on out of town scoreboards and newspapers. So Hockey Night in Canada showed me the Canadian teams, and so I liked Montreal. And then Cam Neely went to Boston, and things sort of changed over the years. But I did. Initially, I did like Montreal. And again, could it change back? I guess anything's possible, right? Anything's possible. It's not overly likely, but anything is possible. So honorable mentions here go to Steve Shutt. Now I can't have Steve Shutt in the top 15 because again, in the time I'm watching them, Shutt he was still a 30 goal scorer in the beginning when I'm watching, but he wasn't what he'd been in the 70s, early 80s. So, well, 1980, and because I started watching in 81, and so yeah. So Shutt he left the team in 85. He ended up in LA briefly. It's an interesting story. I've done a career video on him before. And so he gets an honorable mention here. Honorable mentions as well to Mario Tremblay. I know what he did as coach. I know what happened. I know Patrick. It was terrible. I know, but I liked him as a player. Pierre Mondu was also one that I liked very much, and Patrice Brisebois. Brisebois took more abuse from Montreal fans than anybody else I had seen, who wasn't named Andrei Rasico. Rasico doesn't get on this list, but I did hope that Rasko was gonna make something of himself. I had a bunch of Andrei Rasko rookie cards. I think I still do somewhere. Oh, envy my collection. Yeah. So there are some honorable mentions. I'll throw an honorable mention towards Brendan Gallagher as well. He's never been one of my favorites, but he does work really hard, and he's a 30 goal scorer. So that being said, let's go ahead and get things started. At number 15 on the list, Newfoundland's own Michael Ryder. Ryder was one of those guys that I liked him while he was a Montreal Canadian. And, good goal scorer, seemed like a good guy, competitive every night, liked his work ethic, all those things that I look for in a hockey player. Michael Ryder had that. And then he ends up in Boston for a while there. I was quite excited to see him in Boston. Didn't last long enough in Boston for my liking, but, these things happen. Number 14. Number 14 on the list is... All right, so moving on to number 14. Number 14 on the list. Remember, this is coming from a Bruins fan. Chris Nilan. The one thing with Chris Nilan is the guy could fight, and boy, could he ever fight. But he also was a decent enough player, and he could put the puck in the net every now and then too. He kept you honest on the ice, in more ways than one. And so I like that about him, that at a time where there were plenty of enforcers that just didn't even try to go out there and skate around and play the game. They were there for one job only. Chris Nilan was not one of those guys. Not for the most part. He did have his seasons where his points totals, goals totals were pretty low, but in general, he was still a guy who could play. And I think if you brought all the enforcers into modern day game from the 80s, I think Nilan would be one that could stick. A lot of them, it just wouldn't work because they just didn't have the fundamentals in order to be a fourth liner. I think Nilan would be. So he gets on the board at 14. Number 13. I admit to being a Mats Naslund fan. Mats, no relation to Marcus. Mats Naslund, first 100-point scorer they had in a while when he got there. I'm trying to think of how long it had been in between 100-point scorers, but I know he got there. And honestly, very good player, good team player, and a big part of their offense. And again, this was at a time where I may not have been a huge fan of the team, but I liked Naslund. I thought Naslund was a pretty good player. So Mats Naslund gets in at number 13. I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that, are they? Really? You're going to have a... Where's Maurice Richard? I'm not old enough to have watched Maurice Richard. How old do people think I am? You gotta be what, pushing 80? Come on. Remember Elmer Locke? No, I don't remember Elmer Locke. What was it like when the Leafs won their last Stanley Cup? I don't know. I wasn't around. Number 12. What was it like before color? Okay, now you're just getting insulting. So number 12, Eric Desjardins. Eric Desjardins was a defenseman who could kind of do everything out there, and trading him was a mistake. Losing him was a mistake for Montreal. He really honestly was one of their best players, and losing him was a mistake. As any Montreal fan will likely tell you. Wasn't the only mistake they've made. There are other mistakes that have been made along the way. I'm wearing a jersey of one that, looking back, may very well have been a mistake. But Eric Desjardins, as a member of Montreal, really, really, really solid player overall. Very, very solid player. Number 11. I was looking down to see if the C is closed on this one or if it's an open C. So, because that's the only difference between the old classics and the current jerseys. All right. Number 11. Another defenseman on the list here. Did a jersey video this morning, and I mentioned how the only barber pole jersey I could find, there was an Andrei Markov one, but I think they want $350 for it on eBay. So good luck with that. And yet Markov was an excellent defenseman for them for a long time, and when he left Montreal, it baffled me. It genuinely baffled me because I felt like Montreal needed Markov more than Markov needed Montreal. And, of course, he tried to come back last year, and Montreal was like, not really. And he couldn't really find another place to go in the NHL, which is too bad because Markov was a very serviceable defenseman, very, very defensively responsible, as well as good offensively, so he could kind of sort of do everything. And so Markov gets in at number 11 on this list. Number 10. Number 10, I'll go with... Now, if we get into overall players, Ryan Walter is one of my all-time favorites. Ryan Walter gets into the top 10 on here. Better offensively than I think he got a lot of credit for. And he was solid enough defensively that even when the offense was fading, he was still very useful to them. Won a Stanley Cup with them in 1986 and was in the finals in 1989 as well. That was before coming to Vancouver, where he ended out his career. Ryan Walter, again, great guy. Having talked to him just last week, just great guy. And I've never heard anybody say anything bad about him. And, great team player, great leader. The Capitals showed that when he was team captain for them at a very young age. So, yeah, Ryan Walter gets into the top 10 for me. Number 9. Yeah, this is where it starts to get kind of tough. Number 9. It's funny. If I'd had this guy at 9 a few years ago, I think I probably would have got some flack for it. Now there may be Montreal fans that say, Patches doesn't belong in the top 10. You got Patches in there for. Max Pacioretty, as the years went along, he won me over a little more and more. And what eventually really puts him into this top 10 for me is how he handled things when it was obvious the divorce with the Montreal Canadiens was coming. He still played well, and he was still there, and he never complained. There was never any open defiance by him that I saw. There was never any open rift publicly between the Habs and Pacioretty, even though we knew it was there. He did a very good job of continuing to play and play well, and I thought he made a half decent captain. I thought he got a lot of unfair criticism as he's the worst captain ever. Really? I don't think so. And that definitely that's a playlist you're not going to see as worst captains ever. That's not going to happen. I try to stay out of the really negative videos. I do. I try to stay out of the really negative stuff. I know it may get hits more than some of this stuff does, but I don't want to do like the really negative videos. It doesn't do it for me. And then, like I said, there's other channels that do it, so I don't think there's a whole lot of need for me to do that as well and just pile on. Number 8. Number 8, I'm going to go with one of 2 goaltenders on the list. I may be wearing a spoiler. Number 8, Jose Theodore. And excellent goaltender, came in, had that all-world season in there. He's one of 3 goaltenders on the list. What am I talking about? 3. Honorable mention to Denny Herron while we're talking about goaltenders. Denny Herron, pretty good goaltender for Montreal. during a time where the team wasn't necessarily fantastic, but he was pretty good for them. But Jose Theodore was absolutely all-world. That one year that he was absolutely amazing, and the bar got raised so high he would never clear it. And it was too bad because Jose Theodore was a good goaltender. And he proved that in Colorado. He proved that in Washington. He could be a good goaltender. Florida, too, I believe. He wasn't, again, he never got to that elite level again, but he could be a good goaltender, and he had a pretty good career. And it started in Montreal. And he was fantastic. He was. Number 7 on the list. Larry Robinson played forever, just forever. And then when he went to L.A., there was certainly talk about why is he going to L.A. He's pretty much done. And he showed no he wasn't, and he played a couple years in L.A. and he wasn't bad. But Larry Robinson was one of the best all-around defensemen as well. At a time where offense from the blue line was relatively common, Robinson was on a whole other level than most of the rest of the league. And just really solid defenseman. Again, seemed like a really great team guy. Went on and made a solid coach as well. I think he would have coached a whole lot more if he'd wanted to as a head coach. He definitely showed he could get a team to galvanize around him. So, yeah, Larry Robinson for me is one of my favorite Habs. Number 6. Yep, I'll put him right here. Saku Koivu got hurt a lot, and Saku Koivu always seemed to be coming back from or going into an injury. But Saku Koivu, when he played, he was a really good heart and soul guy, and he was very popular with the fans. And really, in all honesty, it tells you all you need to know when you understand that Montreal fans pretty universally loved Saku Koivu, a fan base that has made a habit of booing guys out of town. And will find something wrong with a player's game pretty darn quick if there's any kind of holes there. And Koivu, there just really wasn't anything. He was a solid team player all the way through, and I was respectful of his career all the way through, and yeah, nothing bad to say about him. There you go. Number 5. Are they all Hall of Famers now? Well, they're gonna be. Yeah, number 5. Carey Price. Now, does Carey Price get overrated by Montreal fans? Absolutely. Does he take a lot of flack from other fans that he shouldn't? Absolutely. Was he the best goaltender of the last decade? That's up for debate. I would say he's close. I would say Lundqvist, you can make the argument for Rask. There's a few guys you can make the argument for, but Carey Price is in that conversation. Carey Price, much like Jose Theodore, had that one year where he was all-world, greatest ever, in all these categories, and it's been hard for him to reach that level again. Do I think he has another Vezina season in him? Absolutely. I would not be surprised if you told me, Carey Price is going to have a year where he's a Vezina winner. Because sometimes goaltenders come out of nowhere and have those kinds of seasons. It happens. So yeah, Carey Price, excellent goaltender. I don't have anything bad to say about him. And where he ends up being on my favorites is when the fans were not enamored with him and there was some booing going on, he took it in stride. And he was like, yep, no, I'm going to prove them all wrong. They can boo me if they want. I'm going to prove them all wrong. And yeah. Number 4. So, Hall of Fame, Bob Gainey. And honestly, the Selke Award, it should be called the Gainey Award. Gainey dominated it. I swear that award was invented for Bob Gainey. Best defensive forward. We got to have this award because look what Bob Gainey does. And so the Bob Gainey Award was born, and he was the best at what he did. And he was pretty good offensively as well. He was no slouch offensively. He was the kind of the original Patrice Bergeron, if you want to look for a comparison. And he didn't score like Bergeron does now, but again, Gainey wasn't really counted on for that level of goal scoring by Montreal. He probably could have if he'd wanted to. The effort was always there. The heart was always there. So who knows? Maybe he could have. Number 3. Yeah. Guy Carbonneau. Guy Carbonneau, and you know the funny thing is they went from Bob Gainey to Guy Carbonneau, and they had both of them on the roster at one point, which is just unfair to everybody. But Carbonneau, honestly, playing with Gainey, that likely helped him tremendously to become the next best defensive forward in the NHL. And then, it's felt like with Montreal, they haven't really had that Gainey Carbonneau type center since. And if they could find somebody who could do that, play second/third line center, be excellent at both ends of the rink, and just chime in with everything. Like maybe Nick Suzuki eventually becomes that. I don't know. Suzuki has more offensive upside than either Carbonneau or Gainey would have had, but I mean Carbonneau had some pretty good scoring seasons as well. So yeah, Guy Carbonneau, Bob Gainey. The Selke dominant duo right there. Number 2, also named Guy. So when I started watching hockey, was it Guy Lafleur's best years? No. But Guy Lafleur was an absolute megastar. And Guy Lafleur, just everything about him was kind of sort of fantastic. And when he came out of retirement and played in Quebec in the Rangers, it didn't feel right at all because he should have been Hab forever. So while he had that ugly divorce from the Montreal Canadiens eventually, he was my favorite. I remember going with my dad to a Vancouver-Montreal game, and the greatest disappointment we had was Guy Lafleur didn't play that game. And, I was all excited about seeing Guy Lafleur. So that's the thing. He was my favorite Montreal Canadian at the time. I cannot have him lower than this. Can't have him lower than second because I was so excited as a kid to see Guy Lafleur. He was one of those athletes that transcended the sport. And I watched the first episode of Last Dance last night. That's giving me a video idea for the entertainment guy. Because when you're getting chills watching plays from basketball from the 80s and 90s, you're going, oh, that's why I love Jordan. That's where I'm like, yeah, I need to do a video. So Guy Lafleur had that impact as well in hockey, where people who didn't necessarily watch hockey could watch plays like by Guy Lafleur and have that wow moment. Now, number 1 should not be a surprise. And yet, if you had told me back in the early 90s, hey, Shannon, so your favorite Montreal Canadian ever at some point, you're going to do a video. I'm going to be like, I'm going to do a video. You mean like with a camera? I'm going to do one of those, like a VHS? I'd have to slap myself and say, hell no, on the internet. What's an internet? So if I told myself back then, you're going to have Patrick Roy as your favorite Montreal Canadian ever, I would have said, no, I'm not. I'm a Bruins fan. I can't do that. Hated Patrick Roy. I hated Patrick Roy because I always feared that he was going to destroy the Boston Bruins. And for the most part, Andy Moog was Raw repellent, but I have a begrudging respect for him. And when I look back on it now, when I look back on hockey back then, and when I look at the Montreal Canadiens organization, to me, Patrick Roy is my favorite. There's a reason I have a Patrick Roy jersey, and I bid, and I won it with a $33 bid. I was really impressed I won it with a $33 bid because, 33. And $33 for this, sure. And the patch I ordered online for $10. So the whole ensemble, $43, and I've got a Patrick Roy with the Stanley Cup Finals patch. And that's the 93 one when he had that amazing run. Absolutely amazing run. That playoff run was one of the most impressive ones I ever saw. I would put that up with Tim Thomas in 2011 and Jonathan Quick in 2012. Those to me are probably the 3 best playoff runs I've seen. Yes, that's going to be a video at some point as well. Best playoff runs by goaltenders in my time watching hockey. Because again, I try not to get into before my time watching hockey because then it just gets all messy. Because it's like, well, you didn't even see that, so how do you know? And it's a valid point. So yeah, it's a valid point. But Patrick Roy, he ends up being my favorite Montreal Canadian. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.